Learning English through exercise number 6. Today we are going to study be verbs negative. I not be cold. I am not. I am not cold. She French. She is. She is. She is not. You can say she isn't. The contraction, she isn't French. You, an accountant. You are not an accountant. And contraction, URENT, you aren't. So do not pronounce this E sound. You aren't. You aren't an accountant. John is not my brother. John isn't. John isn't my brother. They from Berlin. They are not. They aren't. Again, do not pronounce E sound. They aren't from Berlin. Let's go back to the first sentence. I'm not. So this one you can contract I'm. Many people do contraction of ain't, but this is not quite proper. So I'm not cold. This is, I'm sorry, cold. I'm not cold. She isn't French. She isn't French. You aren't an accountant. 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 John isn't my brother. They aren't from Berlin. Berlin. They are from Berlin. I'm not cold. She isn't French. You aren't an accountant. John isn't my brother. They aren't from Berlin. Number 6. We late. We are not. And then contraction. We aren't. We aren't. Again, no E sound. We aren't late. It is not. It is not warm outside. It isn't. It isn't warm outside. I hungry. I am not hungry. So here, contract this. I'm. I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry. Yan and Jill are not on the bus. They aren't. They aren't on the bus. She is not Spanish. She isn't. She isn't Spanish. We aren't late. We aren't late. We aren't late. It isn't. It isn't. It isn't. So in case you say this, it is, it becomes it is and it is. It is. It isn't. It isn't. So here, it isn't. It isn't. It isn't. This flaps. It isn't. It isn't warm outside. I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry. Yan and Jill aren't on the bus. She isn't Spanish. She isn't Spanish. One more time. We aren't late. It isn't warm outside. I'm not hungry. Yan and Jill aren't on the bus. She isn't Spanish. Number 11. He is. And then negative not. So he isn't in the bathroom. He isn't in the bathroom. We are and not. We aren't. We aren't thirsty. We are not thirsty. We aren't thirsty. It is. And then not. It isn't. It isn't sunny. It isn't sunny. You are not. You're not a teacher. You aren't a teacher. You aren't a teacher. They are. They are not at school. They aren't. They aren't. Again, do not pronounce E sound. Let's go back to number 11. He isn't in the bathroom. He isn't in the bathroom. We aren't thirsty. We aren't thirsty. It isn't. It isn't. It isn't. Again, it isn't. And these T flaps, it isn't. It isn't sunny. It isn't sunny. You aren't a teacher. You aren't a teacher. They aren't at school. They aren't at school. He isn't in the bathroom. We aren't thirsty. It isn't sunny. We aren't a you aren't a teacher. They aren't at school. Now number 16. Lucy. Lucy is she. Lucy is not. From Australia. Australia. Lucy isn't from Australia. I am. I am not a nurse. I'm. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a nurse. He is not sleepy. He isn't. He isn't sleepy. We are not at home. We are not at home. We aren't. We aren't at home. We aren't at home. You are not. You're not from China. You aren't from China. Let's go back to number 16. Lu season. Lu season. So this one read together. Lu season. Lucy. Lu season. Lu season. Lu season. Lu season from Australia. 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 I'm I'm not. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a. I'm not a. Not a sounds. Not a. Not a. I'm not a. I'm not a. I'm not a nurse. He's. He isn't. He isn't sleepy. He isn't sleepy. We aren't. We aren't at home. We aren't at home. You aren't from China. You aren't from China. Let's read the sentences again. Lucy isn't from Australia. I'm not a nurse. He isn't sleepy. We aren't at home. You aren't from China. Now, number 21. James is not. James is not smart. James isn't. James isn't. James. So here, James. James isn't. James isn't. James isn't smart. James isn't smart. They are not. They are not. They aren't. They aren't students. They aren't students. My family is not. My family isn't. My family isn't big. Her dog is not. Her dog isn't friendly. Her dog isn't friendly. So friendly. So do not pronounce D. Say friendly. Friendly. Her dog isn't friendly. The house is not. The house isn't expensive. The house isn't expensive. Expensive. Let's go back to 21. James isn't smart. James isn't smart. They aren't students. They aren't students. My family isn't big. My family isn't big. Her dog isn't friendly. Her dog isn't friendly. The house isn't expensive. The house isn't expensive. One more time. James isn't smart. They aren't students. My family isn't big. Her dog isn't friendly. The house isn't expensive.